There are a few seats in the front. So, good morning, everybody. My name is Helen Joanides. I do public programs and outreach here at the archive, and would like to just welcome everybody in person here in the room, as well as our attendees online. You're very, very welcome. Just a few housekeeping. The exit is there on my right. There are bathrooms in the corridors. And if we can just ask everyone to please put their phones on silent. The people online, I'm sure you know where your exits are, so you will be fine. And yeah, so we've had some amazing music by Tembela Bantu Marimbas and Matandi Swatboy, who has brought them here. And now we will commence with our program. So the welcome and the opening of Archives Week will be delivered by our Chief Director for the Department of Cultural Affairs and Sport, Dr. Carol van Beek. So if we can give her a big hand. You can stand in the podium. I'm too short for the podium, so I have to stand next to the podium.
Bring you some heels. Good morning, everyone. I am Carol van Beek. I'm the Chief Director of Cultural Affairs and Sport, of which one of my portfolios. I'd like to extend a very, very welcome to all of you. So I'd like to especially thank our guests that are here, distinguished guests. The Consul General of Netherlands, Eva here, Ms. Helen. While I am acknowledging her, that we've got a very close working relationship and collaboration with the Netherlands. And as I will go on, you know that the Netherlands have also played a very crucial role in our pre-democratic era of this country. I'd also like to acknowledge Professor Odendaal, who is our main guest speaker here today, and as well as what you don't know is that Professor Odendaal was my boss. Still a beginning.
Your first boss.
My first boss. When I entered the archive sector. So I'd also like to acknowledge the head of department, Mr. Guy Redman. He is on his way, as well as colleagues, members of the archival and our heritage fraternity, our archival committee. Welcome to all of you here, our representatives from our academic institutions, community partners, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. Welcome to the opening of the Western Cape segment of our National Archives Week. For me, it is both a privilege and an honor to stand in front of you today as we gather under this year's important and deeply relevant theme, which is Archives for Justice. I do think, and I think we all know, that archives plays a key role in shaping our present through an understanding of what our past actions hold, and through its experiences. It is important to recognize the role of archives and what it plays in supporting justice, human rights, accountability, and a democratic society. So in our country, conversations around the archives is not new. I'd actually like to trace it back to the influential work of South African archivist. Many of you will know him, Dr. Vern Harris. He's actually known as the archivist that pushed back, during that time, all the time. And his writings and contributions after the 1994 period challenged us to think critically about what the archives present and represent, and what they would mean in a democratic society, and what the role of the archivist ought to be. Through initiatives such as the Archives at the Crossroads Conference, this was a conference in 2007, and as well as the work on archives and justice, a South African perspective of 2007, archives were repositioned not as neutral spaces, but as active instruments of justice, accountability, and social memory. And why I am mentioning this work of 2007, trying to bring it to the theme that the National Archives falls into, is that these works remains a fundamental framework for contemporary archival thinking and practice. They continue to inform emerging approaches such as decolonial archival methodologies, expanded digital accessibility, inclusive description practices, and a stronger focus on gender, voice, and representation in archival collections. And I think a few months ago, I got an email from the archives through the MARNA saying that, these archival collections that are really derogative, we need to look at how do we open up that and how do we look at restoring justice and restoring the truth that is embedded in those collections. And I'm happy that we're starting to embark on that with the committee. That the committee will play an essential role in that and to move forward on that. So these ideas continue to resonate today. In fact, the global theme for International Archives Week 2026 is Archives for Justice. It reflects the enduring relevance of those conversations first articulated here in South Africa back then in 2007. And perhaps it invites us to ask an important question. Are we once again at the crossroads? If we think about the role of justice and music, specifically jazz, and when I did some research for my opening, I came to know that Dr. Vern Harris was an avid lover of jazz. And as an anecdote, part of my own portfolio includes oversight and the development of music in the Western Cape, which includes the jazz genre. Perhaps this is why, as an archivist and librarian by training, I remain deeply passionate about archives, because archives, like music, carry memory, identity, struggle, and hope. It tells the story of the people. Further, when I reflected on Archives for Justice, I would particularly like to bring in the Mayibuye Center, now the University of the Western Cape, Robben Island Museum, Mayibuye Archives, to the fore. The archives have played and continue to play a critical role in preserving the history of South Africa's liberation struggle, like other archives, such as your Fort Hare archives as well. They remain an invaluable resource for researchers, students, and the public, enabling engagement with South Africa's history from the 1940s through to the first democratic elections in 1994. Importantly, these archives challenge colonial and pre-democratic era narratives by giving voice to those who were excluded from official records. In many ways, Mayibuye complements the work of the Western Cape Archives and Record Services. While the Western Cape Archives and Record Services represents records dating back to 1651, collections such as Mayibuye complete the historical picture, ensuring that multiple voices, perspective, and truth are preserved. So the connection between the archives and justice is also deeply symbolic. The archives building that we are sitting in here in Roland Street was once a prison where political activists were detained. That story reminds us that archives are not neutral spaces. They are deeply connected to memory, power, resistance, and ultimately justice. And this, I think, for me, is precisely why Archives for Justice is not only a theme, it is a responsibility. In the sense, archivists must also be understood not only as custodians of memory, but as agents of justice. Archival activists will ensure access to records, protecting its authenticity and safeguarding truth against silence, distortion, and erasure. So in recent years, I think a year and 2 years ago, the Western Cape Archives and Record Services has actively strengthened this justice-oriented role by bringing back history into the public discourse through reflective and dialogical engagements. You may have remembered the thought-provoking conversation featuring Joel Peter James April and Judge Albie Sachs, amongst others, that were hosted here at Roland Street itself, transforming our archives into a living civic space for access to the past. I'd also like to perhaps hone in on one of the writers, Nusrat Khan, who wrote an article titled Abdullah Ibrahim and the Politics of Jazz in South Africa. It's a 2020 paper. You can find it on History Online. He noted that jazz has had an essential and a special role in the social and cultural politics of South Africa. That role was remembered at the Sounds at the Archives event. That was in 2024, if my memory serves me correct, where Cape Town's rich musical heritage came alive in the Western Cape Archives, showcasing local talent, soulful melodies, and community united by jazz. So by hosting such events, the archives not only preserve history, but activate it, transforming memory into living testimony and ensuring that the struggle, resilience, and creativity embodied in South African jazz continue to inspire future generations in the pursuit of justice. Actually, not to put you on the spot, Kumara, I said, I think when I came, I said, how can we position the archives differently? By looking at what collections do we have in the archives. So we have some of the Abdullah Ibrahim collections in the archives. How do we use the collections in the archives to tell the story? Because your records tells the story of peace and it brings it to the present. And I think that is the challenge that I've given to the archives to, transform from an archaic space into an inclusive, interpreting space where our young people, our researchers can learn from, and as well as to transform, looking at the, and it's a program that we have just started, it's called the ALMAL Hub. So ALMAL stands for Arts, Language, Museums, Archives, and Libraries. So it also embodies that the togetherness as well as the unity of what heritage, arts, and culture needs to be for our society. So the engagements at the archives form part of the broader reflection of 50 years of democracy in South Africa, demonstrating that archives are not passive repositories, but active spaces where democracy, democratic memory is explored, questioned, and made meaningful. So the space therefore occupies a vital role in our democracy. As custodians of records dating back to 1651, it preserves an extraordinary documentary heritage that supports governance, research, identity, and public memory. Importantly, it also holds a unique and critical function in preserving the documentary footprint of government itself, both pre-democratic and the democratic periods. It is within these records that one can trace how decisions are made, how policies evolve, how administrations function, and how the state engaged with its citizens across different historical areas. In this sense, the archives are not only a repository of heritage, but a living institutional memory of governance and state practice. As it serves scholars, government, communities, and citizens, it forms a hub for authentic records, safeguarding truth, accountability, and continuity through birth and death registers, deeds, maps, photographs, and official documentation. Far from that abstract, these collections are evidentiary foundations of rights, belonging, and historical truths, contributing meaningfully to research, restitution, identity, restoration, and social justice. But more importantly, archives, I think, must do more than preserve. They must engage and become spaces of discourse, spaces where society reflects critically on itself, spaces where silences are acknowledged, spaces where excluded histories are recovered, and spaces where written records means living memory. This is central to archives for justice. Fourth, archival standards remain essential. They ensure that the records are preserved, arranged, described, and made accessible and retrievable for future generations. But beyond systems and processes, archives are ultimately about dignity. It's about access, accountability, and justice. As we move deeper into a digital and an artificial intelligence-driven world, this responsibility becomes even more urgent. Artificial intelligence transforms how information is created, accessed, and interpreted. It brings opportunity for digitization, improved access, and wide engagement with archival collections, but it also raises serious risks around authenticity, manipulation, and trust. And I think that is why the role of the archives is very important. In this environment, archives, as I've just mentioned, become more essential as institutions of verified truth. They safeguard provenance, protect integrity, and ensure that society retains access to reliable evidence in an increasingly complex information landscape. So the future of archives must therefore be both technologically responsible and responsive, and ethically grounded, embodying capability, but unwavering in principle. And I'd like to stress that unwavering in principle. As we look ahead, the challenge is not only about preservation, it's about sustainability, ensuring that archives remain relevant, accessible, and trusted across generations. Because ultimately, archives are not only just about history, they're about dignity, they're about accountability, they're about truth, they're about practice. As we open the Western Cape segment of the National Archives week today, may we continue to strengthen archives not only as custodians of records, but as living institutions of democracy, memory, and justice. May we preserve not only documents, but human experience. And may we ensure that future generations inherit archives that are authentic, accessible, sustainable, and inclusive. So this year's Archives Week celebration will take a different and a more outward-facing approach. The program will actively take the archives beyond institutional spaces and into communities, particularly schools and other community settings, in order to promote broader access, inclusion, and public participation. The week also includes a range of continuing activities, such as the online workshops and talks, and as well as guided tours of the archives building and curated exhibitions. And I extend a welcome to all of you who are here and online to come to the archives and have that experience. So this concludes my welcome. I hope you are now very warm. It's a nice day outside, and we're going to have warm discussions and meaningful engagement and inspiring that will inspire our Western Cape segment of the archives. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carol, for painting the picture of the archival landscape, past, present, and future, and really centering people in that, because that is very important to us, that archives are not about documents, they're about the people in the documents. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our guest speaker for today. Professor Andre Odendaal is the Vice Chancellor's Writer in Residence and Honorary Professor in History and Heritage Study at the University of the Western Cape. After studying at Stellenbosch and Cambridge universities, he spent 13 years at UWC, where he started and directed the pioneering Mayibuye Centre for History and Culture in South Africa, which built up a rare multimedia archive on the freedom struggle, consisting of 70,000 photographs, thousands of hours of film and video productions, 1,000 oral history tapes, and about 250 collections of documents. So after the 1994 elections, Prof. Odendaal was one of 23 people appointed to the Arts and Culture Task Group by the new minister to advise on cultural policies for democratic South Africa. And he was also very involved in 1980 struggle politics in the UDF and SASCOS and the National Sports Congress, after being one of a handful of white first-class cricketers to join the non-racial SA Cricket Board during the apartheid years. So he was the founding director of the Robben Island Museum and Carol's boss, of course, in the democratic South Africa's first national heritage institution, and subsequently became the CEO of the Western Province Cricket Association and the chairperson of Cricket South Africa's first Transformation Monitoring Committee. After 25 years running organizations, he was due a change, and he started working full-time as an independent researcher, writer, and publisher. His latest publication in 2025 is The Early Writings of Alex Laguma. So we will hand over to Prof. Odendaal for our keynote speech on Archives for Justice. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Helen. Sorry, cricket, that you come into. Actually very special for me to walk into this archive today, to feel the warmth. Archivists are warm people. The team was buzzing here over coffee. The director is definitely not like a prison commandant. Beautiful. Yes, in a broad sense. And it's just, archives have always been very special places for me in my life. So it's a privilege for me to speak here today. And I'd like to thank you very much, Director Dingayo, also Amanda, who's just walked in, Ngawe, and Constance Ngobo, who's Deputy Director as well as then Carol, a very warm welcome. And it is so amazing to see firstly how quickly time flies, but just she was so a student who came in there as an intern with no kind of status. And just got into that space, and you know when someone belongs there, and she made that her career. And it's beautiful to see Marco, he's been reappointed for 5 years. And I got the word for contract from so it's really a person who's in every sense dynamic, progressive, inquiring, and gets things done. I think that, you know, we've heard about at another level of government where people are interested in some things, but are missing other things. Culture, art, heritage, sport are all, as Carol said, integrated in this department and backed by efficiency. Believe me, I've been around in this space for 40 years. And it is truly wonderful to see civil servants doing service to the communities in the way that you guys do. So thanks very much for that. And that's also why, part of why I feel that thank goodness I was asked to speak for an hour originally, and I asked for less, or I was given less. I've got 4 pieces of paper, all stapled together. After 10 minutes, just say Lashla or Kweza. And then I will try and finish in 45 minutes. But it's great to see the 3 themes for Archives Week written in 3 languages. Egotrina is Zola, a machtig beheerder, innovating for the future. So he invites us to talk about the past, present, and future when we engage with discussions about archives and South African intellectual history. I would say those is synonymous with archives. It might be. So the first point I want to make is that it is time for the archive of a deep-rooted tradition of Black South African thinkers and indigenous ways of knowing to find a home at our universities, heritage institutions, school curricula, and intellectual history of South Africa. So that sounds like fancy talk, but it's absolutely has to happen now. But not yet our institutions are part of the dissonance in our society still in terms of their failure to deliver, in terms of the way they've been broken down through state capture and other things. And we need them now also to represent the cultures and long history out there within institutions so that whoever comes in can feel themselves reflected in those institutions. And I'm saying this with a specific reason, and that is I've been privileged just to finish now a manuscript called Power and the Pen, centering 200 years of Indigenous literature, which I've edited together with Pamela Maseko, the profs from NMU, Babal Mokwana, and Nomalanga Mkhize, together with 22 contributors, 17 of which I'm very proud to say are women. And this is the new generation looking at the legacy of 200 years of Indigenous writings in a new way and demanding that it starts getting recognized, absorbed, and engaged with at university. And I just want to start by picturing the scene, asking you to picture the scene. It is the early 1820s in a small settlement in the deeply rural Hume Valley under the towering mountains at Kabimbola or Hogsback in the days before cars, roads, and telegraph wires. Noi Balfour, one of the disciples of the Ngqika prophet Nzikana, is working with the Scottish missionary John Bennick. They are developing an alphabet for the isiXhosa language, and in 1823 print the first primer in that language on one of the earliest printing presses in southern Africa. The press had just been delivered after a bumpy ox-wagon journey of several weeks from the nearest port, which is today called Gqeberha, following a long rough passage by sea in a sailing ship. I'd love to spend 5 minutes talking about those journeys by sea. So this printing press, a long journey before it came to Hume. And the missionary in charge recorded what happened. On the 17th of December, 1823, we got our press in order. On the 18th, the alphabet was set up. And yesterday, that is the 19th of December, 1823, we threw off 50 copies. This moment heralded the beginning of the transition of the indigenous languages of Southern Africa from their mainly spoken to written form. 12 years later, Benny and Balfour and the missionaries' other African advisors completed the first translation of the New Testament of the Christian Bible. When they traveled to see to its publication, their small mission station was burned down. It was in any case too exposed to unsatisfactory climate variation, dry weather spells, and water shortages in particular. So they appealed to the Queen Regent Noniba, via Makoma and Charlie, sons of the late Funkani Nika, for land to build a new station. She agrees to give the missionaries 1,000 Morgan site where two rivers meet. This leads to the formation of the Lovedale Institution, which from 1841 becomes one of the most famous educational centers on the African continent, south of the equator, in the 1950s. and Forte rises alongside it. African people involved in the first printing of an indigenous language and in the building, the founding of the first educational institution that shaped nearly 50% of South Africans' matriculants up to World War II. Now, fast forward some 160 years to Lusaka, Zambia, 1985. In a small office in a builder's yard off Cha Road, lovely word, I never quite understood where it comes from, in the city centre, accessed either through a sanitary lane or through a neighbouring shop. Noye's great-great-grandson, Zwelithini Paulo Jordan, presents a briefing paper on the new phase of counter-revolution and a complementary submission on the question of negotiation to Oliver Tambo, president of the Exile Liberation Movement. Tambo sets up a secret constitution committee to consider the issues Jordan raises. The venerated exile leader describes its task as an ad hoc, unique exercise that has no precedent in the 73-year history of the movement. At a key historical moment, Jordan's writings initiate a process to develop constitutional guidelines for a democratic South Africa. They outline two interlinked strategies that should be developed by the liberation movement in its final push to remove from power, after 3.5 centuries of violent colonial and apartheid rule, the white minority government. Jordan, who has already survived an assassination attack by the apartheid forces, he was in the room with Ruth first when she was incarcerated, and has been detained by his own organization for his independent-mindedness for speaking up. He's put in charge of a small leadership group to oversee the birth of these constitutional guidelines. After its release in 1988, this document becomes the template for the future constitution of a democratic South Africa. Interweave mass struggle and negotiations lead to democracy in 1994. And if you read those documents, you will see that it happened as if scripted by Jordan in his writings 9 years before. Both part of collective thinking and effort, these two contributions are arguably amongst the most influential pieces of writing in 20th century South Africa. In a remarkable twist of history, the African thinkers who played such significant roles in two epoch-defining moments, 160 years and several generations apart, are directly related. As I've said, Noye is Paulo's great-grandfather. In between, the family produces other noted educationists, intellectuals, and writers. I've took it as a challenge to try and look at the intergenerational linkages of African intellectualism by looking at one family for this book. And who also comes up there is Noye's son, Makapela, was a student at Odendaal in the first intake. He wrote some of the first writings in Indaba, one of the earliest newspapers. His daughter married Nathaniel Mbala, the grandson of the Ndlambe chief, who was one of the first intakers, one of the college for the princes and princesses of the chiefs, who were held diplomatic hostage and put into suits while their fathers were on robbery. He was so bright, he came to the Cape Art classes, the Cape Art School classes, and he was sent to England, Canterbury, to the Anglican institution there. And he went to the British Parliament in 1864. Very important year, because that's when overall bowling was legalized in England. And came back from there, being able to play cricket differently to the people in the Cape who were still bowling underarm. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing the journeys that African intellectuals have gone over in 200 years. And Mhala was the one of the founders of Fort Hare. He was the newspaper editor in Iswilabantu. He was a vice president of the first South African Native Congress in 1890. And he was a committee member of the Interstate Native College Scheme, which actively promoted the formation of a black higher education institution. That is now just three of the generations starting in 1823. Then George Ntantala, who is Emerson Ntantala's father, who's a major feminist, one of the first people women to study at Fort Hare, and wrote a beautiful biography called A Last Mosaic, was his daughter. And then she marries A.C. Jordan, the great novelist, who became the first African professor at UCT. And while they in Kroonstad teaching in 1943, Colin Jordan is born, follows an amazing path and writes down this document, which shapes the new South Africa in 1994. There's almost no recognition in studies of South African literature and history of this family history. Indeed, little meaningful knowledge of the particular achievements and intergenerational legacies of the networks, institutions, and organizations that sustained the thinking and actions of numerous African intellectuals in the Jordan family and more broadly. Dongela Masilela has written about these constellations of new Africans, the intellectuals who shaped African thinking. Because they were excluded from the institutions of colonial rule and white apartheid, they had to join the struggle. If you were an intellectual, you were in the struggle. You were defining what should happen. If you were in the struggle, you were an intellectual. That's what our Masilela said. There was no other place to shape your environment and society. But there is little imagining even of this history in our universities. Where have you read this? I only discovered this 2 or 3 months ago. And it has to happen now that that situation changes. The words and sensibilities of the 19th and 20th century African writers and intellectuals engaged within these pages gave the generations that followed the voice with which to challenge colonial oppression and the tools and imagination from indigenous knowledge, which they could apply to develop new concepts of politics, sociology, gender, history, education, literature, religion, law, biology, environmental awareness. Paul Grendon, who studied with Zonnebloem just up the road in 1896, specialized in botany. He knew Greek, Latin, and maths. At Zonnebloem, he was taught one of the few mission stations that Dad had. He wrote an epic poem of 197 pages, which is described as unrivaled during the colonial period in Black South African writing as a poem, epic poem. And he edited Ilanga Natal newspaper. He became the personal tutor of the young Sobusa who became King of Swaziland, whose mother sponsored Abantu Kwato, the newspaper of the new ANC. These are intellectual networks, history, thoughts, profound things that happen, which are totally missing from our knowledge. I don't think I'm exaggerating to say that. I don't want to exaggerate. I want to humbly say, universities, wake up, make space for this, because we are just as exclusive and exclusionary as we were under apartheid virtually. Okay, let me end that one over there. But I want to come back to what I said at the beginning. To me, an archive is a sacred space. It's something very beautiful to be able to do. The respect that goes into the work, the people who work and look after those documents. And for me, going to the old Cape archives for the first time, bringing a file like that with a covered around it, you open that ribbon, beautifully put down there, it's something special. You open it up and it's a cabinet meeting of the Honourable Man Rhodes's cabinet in 1890. It's just like quite amazing to be able to engage with that kind of knowledge and think yourself into that space and that time. But for me, the most amazing thing was when I started my master's at Stellenbosch, which had not really gone past the great trick at that stage in terms of dissertations. I saw somewhere in Leonard Thompson's Unification of South Africa about 3 pages on the responses of Catholics to unification in 1910. And I thought I'd like to do that as a topic for my masters. And the professor said, "You must be joking. There's no material. You will never find material on that." I went to the National Library, and in one of the most life-changing moments for me, the newspaper, Impos of Ansundu, first edition of the first independent newspaper in South Africa, started by a 23-year-old Shaitli Shababi, was put in front of me. In those days, the newspaper was there. It wasn't trying to look at it on whatever today. Thank goodness we've been able to digitize. But to turn over that page of that newspaper was something absolutely profound. In the first 4 pages of this 8-page newspaper was all English advertisements from Dyer and Dyer. Of course, amongst them, don't forget to buy your cricket kit. And then also what the mayor of King Williamstown said, what the Prime Minister said in Cape Town, and what Queen Victoria said in London. Those are the first 4 pages. And those are the only pages that most historians have ever touched, except for A.C. Jordan in the 50s when he was in Cape Town. And in the other 4 pages were Xhosa columns, in which the emerging school, middle class, aspiring to be part of colonial society in a dynamic way, demanding space because of the skills they developed, wrote their own stories. It was like the struggle papers in the 1980s, where like Samstan and Grassroots and all these papers, where people wrote the paper, worked at night with helpers because they get paid, sent the newspapers out that were distributed by people in all sorts of innocent looking ways because they had to not be caught. And people distributed in Oudtshoorn and Samstan, and they sent back stories to Cape Town for the next edition. Info operated exactly like this. So from isiGetimi actually in 1870 to the late 80s, but especially Info Zabansundu and later Israel Abantu, the people, the Xhosa columns were the archive that early literate generation of Xhosa created for us. And in there, it's far from having not enough material to do that topic of the thesis. I did my master's, my PhD, 3 books and a few others also on cricket feeding. It's absolutely, so for 40 years, that introduction to import in the National Library basically has been my career-defining kind of moment. And it just goes to show again the value of what you are doing in the archives and in the libraries, and how important it is to give people access to work it out for themselves how they'd like to interpret it, see it, and what they make of it. But not to know that in 2026, in our South African universities on a large scale, in our curricula at school, is a crying shame. And it shows it's part of the unfinished business of democracy. We know that we've got a beautiful constitution, and in reality, the socio-economic exclusion and marginalization of the people is totally unacceptable. We need the next step to change. I'm not going to call it a second transition because it got criticized for it. I think that's what we all agree. We've got to do better, and we've got to do it urgently. Those who are dispossessed to be part of their own country in a real way. That was the goal of the struggle, the goal of the Constitution. In so many ways, including in our field, this is still undone. And of course, we all know it, we parrot it, but we need to tell the story. That the extent of erasure, the extent of historical exclusion in real life and in history is staggering. I am more and more overwhelmed by that fact, the more I read and learn. And Ben Okri, the novelist from West Africa, explained it very carefully, that his family's lives stretched back centuries and were remembered through legend and rich tradition. It was in the books that he first learned of his invisibility. He searched for himself and his people in all the history books he read, and to his youthful astonishment, he found that he did not exist. Can you imagine that? Chebe, also the great West African novelist, said that in the colonial situation, presence is the key word. The land thieves and the violent conquest people, which we see still happening today in the world, they had to pretend that their life was normal. So they pushed everyone aside and made them invisible in their circle of thinking and activity in their institutions and schools and this. And we have to go back to that task of undoing that. It's a massive thing. It comes from 5 centuries of slavery, conquest, exploitative capitalism, violence, genocide, everything which is repeating itself today as we go into these uncertain times. So, I'll chuck that one away now. Just to show you finally, and it's not a joke this time, in cricket, besides the Bukani Bantu, the founders, and dear comrade president, which is where I try to show the intellectual traditions. In cricket, we decided you can't stick and paste the whole histories. They're so distorted. You have to reimagine them. You have to create a new paradigm. You've got to go back to the first boat that came in, British warships, struck at Ore in 1806, 40 British warships, the biggest seaboard invasion until the Second World War, I think. And when they took off their bayonets and cannon and guns and bloodbags, and there were also cricket balls and cricket bats. It was on every British military expedition as globalization happened under colonialism, the first phase. Whether it was Gaul in Sri Lanka or Bridgetown, Barbados, or Mumbai, India, Cape Town, the colonizers built a fort, usually so they could face that way, looking at the people that they were going to conquer, and also set up sports, the cricket fields, and and horse riding as part of the compulsory, only since the Napoleonic Wars, compulsory activities of the army. And in 4 books on the history of South African cricket from that time to 1960, that existed before we started our work, there were 18 names of black people in that cricket history. They all came from one game, where the black team from Cape Town was given a chance to play against the 1892 English team after they'd beaten the whites only South Africa in 1.5 days in a test match. And the local black cricketers, Samar Samsudin, scored the highest score in 22 matches against the tourists. And Phil Mendrith took 4. He bowled so well that they compared him to one of the great Australian fast bowlers, the first guy to have terrorized the English, because Test cricket only started in 1877. That was the only scorecard put on page 808 without a report of Lucken's history of South African cricket. So in 4,000 pages of cricket history up till 1960, it was only that one page. Today, we're on to volume 4, and we have put in, we found 125 representative tournaments played by teams in interprovincial cricket in 7 different racial South African bodies at one time. And each one of those has been a needle in a haystack search for 40 years. But if you do not produce the statistics, how do you tell the narrative of the game of cricket? And in 2 combi journeys, I collected wonderful archives. One of them was going to Ahmed Katrada's flat in Colbert House, where in the 50s all the people used to sleep over and have parties and do things that young people do across racial lines and so on. And then the other one was to visit Yusuf Lorgat. Told me, Andre, I've got the record of Sakri for you. You must come and collect it. And I took a combi, hired a combi, drove it down to Cape Town, with 8 boxes of materials. Out of that, we've got 260 full scorecards of the Booley Bowl tournaments. Now, that's not first-class cricket, it was the B section. Because the people in Dwelland, Southwestern District, Central Karoo, Victoria East, Queenstown, Corner, Western Transvaal, Eastern Transvaal, Equities. That is where the grassroots and playing the tradition of non-racial cricket for what we got in 1990. They will, for the first time, become part of cricket history next year. We've already done the 229 first-class matches by the big province, Transvaal, Natal, Western Province, EP. Were brought out thanks mainly to the work of Chris Reddy. But this is what the YEDA is about, delivering and bringing forward these new histories. You can never talk about different cricket history again in the way that people used to. And that, I promise you, is deeply entrenched. There are 24 books out of this project to rewrite the history of South African cricket. And it is so important in every aspect of life to do it. Also, archives in every aspect of society, gender, obviously hugely important. You know, all the people who are excluded, as Bernardo says, who are excluded from the archives, they need to be looked for and written about. And in that way, in intersectional ways now, not just the struggle versus this and that, but in multiple levels of society, that's what we have to do. And Vern is going to speak here, and Carol has given you some sense of the idea. The archive is not a big repository that you guard like a prison inside the walls. but something that is, you're not a watchdog, you're a facilitator of the dispersion of knowledge and debate. But I don't have time to look at that. What is there? I just think there are some wonderful things happening. I'm an optimist, and we must be optimistic. So I'm going to tell you first what I think is positive that's happening, and then I'm going to say, leave you with a very big warning to come. So the final theme of the Archives Week is innovating for the future. Okanye ukusungula okwexesha elizayo okubenike die toekoms. It is up to the new scholars now and archivists and heritage workers to take that task forward. And every generation has to grapple with what it means to be fully human and how best their society should be structured and move forward. And I have faith in the new generation who have been emerging since democracy, looking through new lenses and using new languages and changed contexts, that they're also going to make a difference in engaging with history, the humanities, and arts. Innovation and empowerment, sometimes buzzwords. I hate buzzwords. We've got to do things. They are key to moving forward in the present. The key aim for us in South Africa after the traumas of 3 centuries is to heal, grow, and promote fairness and dignity in the world. And the new generation has a massive advantage because they are language competent. Their language competencies. Only now, decades after democracy, is there a steady growth of a critical body of scholars who are able to provide insights gained from growing to maturity inside an African language, inside African culture. This enables previously virtually all white institutions, talking about Aristotle and so on, which is important also, which drew mainly from colonial languages and mindsets to start theorizing from within diverse languages and answering questions in depth that come from those languages. Also now, the new definitions of the archive, as we said, about Fern Harris, and he'll be talking next Friday. We also have the age of machine learning upon us, which is remarkable also already in this specific history that we're doing. Jonathan Scoots has put in all those newspapers from 1870s to 1890, and he's looked at how the editors use certain words like Uhlanga or Ilizwe and so on. And he works out from that how changing notions of the nation came to the fore in the time. You can do 20 years in this archive with a naked eye. You'll never be able to get that information, that data at your fingertips. Steve Davis is doing the same thing with the archives of the Truth Commission. You put in every single report, statement, and out of that, see the geographies, the locations, the categories of people, the names of people, where they grew, which areas mostly are represented. Again, nothing that we could do on our own. The Mandela Foundation is currently working with Microsoft to digitize all the documentaries and oral interviews of Mandela. Can you imagine the instant written knowledge that's going to come from that? They're stopping at one point, and that is we're not going to allow them to clone his voice and make avatars of it. Because in that case, in a fake news situation, you will be made to say anything that anyone wants them to. And that is like the challenges of the new technologies, of course, as we can see today with Elon Musk. Horrible racist background that's appalling, who wants to take over as a civilization of respect for others. Totally opposite in ethos to what we aspire to, and yet has this incredible power, and it's growing amongst people like that. So this brings us to the hard challenges that we're going to face. While engaging with the rapidly changing world and reveling in the new innovation and technologies, we've also got to be alert to its dangers of a dramatically speeding AI revolution with its seeming fellow travelers of authoritarianism and a growing surveillance capitalism. They can facially recognize you in Lebanon, blow you up from the phone you carry, and so on. We don't even know where this is going. I listened to a fantastic input last week on narrow AI, which we can control and use for the purposes we want. Generalized AI, generalized intelligence, which is going beyond our control, and super intelligence, which we can't control if we let it get out of hand and could end up killing us all before climate change does. That's like a serious presentation I heard last week by wonderful Stellenbosch professor Lagrange in education. It was mind-blowing. So we're sitting here in the comfort of this old room between love, for this warmth, and chatting and so on. The stuff is happening all around us. Somehow or other, we've got to build that in, firstly, to our education system. How do we deal with it? How do we distinguish, and how do we not lose the human in us? Already, Prof. Lagrange is talking about non-human kin. Make kin with the non-human. The machines and the people will become much more one in the future. It's just mind-blowing. Institution building, though, in that old-fashioned way, before I end positives, is so crucial. Today, make clear and consolidate the values of your archive and organization, what it stands for. Make it strong and stay from inside as far as possible. Build, energize, and defend it. Because institutional integrity is absolutely essential if we're going to reconstruct and stabilize South Africa, our own young democracy. We can't succeed in anything if we can't deliver services, if everyone's fighting, if they burn the records on purpose so that they can't be looked at, and so on. Institutional integrity, please keep this beautiful space and work ethic and delivery here. It's just as someone who started Maibuye and was the founding director at Robben Island Museum, it's just so important. And State Capture's purpose was to break those kind of spines that could keep us from delivering for democracy. Also, have fun. Let us feed off the new energies of today. Try to work in a way that is joyful and relevant in the present. I know I'm not conveying that. But it's so important in working person to person. Critically, your approach, that's very important. We don't have to sit on the line, but be positive, be intersectional, multi-perspective will help to heal some of the terrible shortcomings and sicknesses that we see today in our society, politics, and leadership. But always, very importantly for me, link back to the positive intellectual heritage and lived experiences of the generation before. Don't sever that link. I can understand the impatience of the youth and saying 1994 was this and that. But when you hear Naledi Pandor speak on the steps of the International Court of Justice, it says South Africa's tradition is openness and inclusivity and reaching out in solidarity and multilateralism through exile struggle, and people from the time of Dube and Seme studying in America and going to Britain, to Pan-African conferences and looking at the world, being interested in it. Z.K. Matthews' committee writing a response to the Atlantic Charter in 1943 called Africans' Claims. All those wonderful things you say you're going to create now in your world. professors of Nazism who want in the colonial positions. African want those rights. You are thinking only about yourself, and this is what's proved to happen in the last year. So we need to bring this African heritage into schools and universities and museums and archives. And very importantly, intellectuals from the global south need to start developing and seeking meaningful new definitions of what human rights means. It is us, like the people before, who've got to define what human rights means. And that is, we must now get to where we find ourselves. Besides the unsatisfactory state of our own country, Lanka shows, and these socioeconomic indicators show constantly, there's also a hostile environment in this time globally. And as Carol asked, are we once again at the crossroads? We are at the crossroads, guys. Besides AI, and it's challenging, besides the unwritten history that we still haven't even touched the surface of, there's also a massive political onslaught that's coming our way. And it's not our fault only, despite all the things that we failed to do since 94. I want to read this if you don't mind. For over 2 years, defenseless children, women and men, families and communities in Gaza have been bombed and brutalized daily in an unimaginable full genocide which dehumanizes all of us. The self-proclaimed upholders of universal values now trash human rights to the extent that the word as a Western definition has lost its meaning. The already problematic notions of Western civilization and the values of political liberalism, human rights, and the rule of law, long posited as Western virtues that had to be imposed by conquest and wars on lesser people, today lie buried under the rubble of Gaza, together with tens of thousands of bodies, in the words of Odendaal, one of the most profound political commentators and writers in the world today. And as the African-American Houston quotes from Baltimore reminds us in this essay on pharaohs, we are black people, here and there, victims of the West, a people held just outside its liberal declarations, but kept close enough to be enchanted with its promises. We know the beauty of this house, its limestone steps, its wainscoting, which I don't know what that exactly means, although I can see it, because the next word is its marble baths. But more, we know that the house is haunted, and there is blood in the bricks and ghosts in the attic. We know that there is both tragedy and comedy in this condition. Our own lives and culture, our music, our dance, our writing, were all created in this absurd space beyond the walls of civilization. Africans have always been outside the walls of the inside. And today, every one of us in this room must wake up to a very, very big fact. And that is to look at the 10 points in Project 25, which is a far-right playbook for American authoritarianism. It has 10 goals in it, and I'll read them to you. And we can also, I think that the captain needs to circulate 10 points of Project 25. All 10 of them point like daggers to the heart of our inclusive, artful constitution and its values. And this is what they are. The importance of Christian nationalism. And in South Africa, we see privatized institutions already pushing that agenda. Cutting the civil service, ending racial equity efforts, eviscerating LGBTQ+ rights and equality, restricting sexual and reproductive health and rights, hardline immigration policies, ending climate change efforts and restricting environmental policies, ending woke military policies, reforming political education, in America, you can't teach what certain things in Miami and elsewhere now. And you're very, really in danger as an academic if you speak. And then restricting human rights and exiting international bodies. Is that not the opposite of Mandela, what no lady Campbell said on that RCJ? And we need to draw a clear line in South Africa between those who support our constitution and those who support aspects of Project 25. If Gayton McKenzie School will take the lifeline support system of a patient who's a foreigner in a hospital, you can't be supporting the constitution. Those who are Democrats and those who aren't, these ideas are being spread in South Africa too at a speed as fast as the AI revolution. I was at a presentation where it was said that AfriForum's youth and the Republican youth in America chaired under the sort of, a non-publicized conference of global right-wing youth movements in South Africa. We know about this kind of stuff happening. You hear Trump on television, shake your head and say this guy's crazy. But things are happening as we've seen throughout the world. And this is what has led us to this terrible situation in Gaza, to the Iran war, to Venezuela, and to everything else he just thinks he might want to do. So, side with the basics of the program of this anti-constitutional declaration, fitting snugly into the long genealogy of colonialism, racism, and white supremacy, and you should be told to go and stand with AfriSol, AfriForum, and Solidariteit, who all come from the right of 80s, youth, and others. Gary Player, of course, now definitely, he always was, said I wanted known that I'm the golfer of South Africa of the world and apartheid, and we're not going to let happen here what happened in Congo in the 60s. That somehow he still gets away with being one of the founders of democracy, thanks to Madiba's generosity. And all those who supported apartheid will now propound white victimhood and talk about civilizational superiority is a word that Rubio and Hexted are using all the time. And it's as if they're trying to wipe out the 20th century in these games as though it did not happen. So all the civil rights stuff, all the women's rights stuff, all the women in control of their body stuff, your choices of what you want to be, are just going to be, are being attacked currently. It has never been more important than at this moment, not only attacked directly, in a very, very brazen kind of way. It has never been more important than at this moment when an old barbarism empire is revealing itself in new colors to reinforce, and it is therefore very important for us to reinforce South Africa's 200-year-old inclusive, human-centered intellectual inheritances born out of the bitter taste of dispossession and struggle, and to do this by recovering history, shaping and holding on to liberating narratives, resisting and redefining what it means to be human in a post-truth world faced by climate extinction threats. As we look at the future, it is worth repeating what Nyamaka Banipichana reminds us in our book, Power and the Pen. Part of the dehumanizing power of the dictator is to instill fear, to deny history, and to program thought. But through the exploration of the whole realm of the economy, science, the arts, the extension of dreams and the imagination, we can learn from our African intellectual inheritances and experiences by holding uppermost in our consciousness the idea of our humanity, even as the narrative of dispossession and dehumanization is playing itself out. Our universities, archives, heritage institutions, cultural practitioners, our departments must be leaders in this area, in this new area of self-definition, self-assertion, and yes, resistance. It is through struggle that things are changed for the better. Thanks and keep up the good work. Celebrated my birthday. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Odendaal, for helping us tease out the threads of Archives for Justice from the family history of Pallo and Holden to the sacred spaces of the archives, even to some cricket and all the presences and absences and the unfinished business and where we need to go in our profession. But I think what we're going to do now is touch on the engagement part of the, maybe not fun, but the kind of living space of the archives that both you and Carol mentioned. So I think we want to open up the floor to some questions for either of our speakers from the room and also online. We will take a couple from the room first if anybody has a question. No? Any questions online? No?
Nothing. I have a complicated question.
Yes,
After that ending, guys, it's like a massive issue. And it does relate to what we were studying, what we're learning, how we're doing it, and with what fits. And I think our democracy was so thought about, struggled for such adverse circumstances for so long that we can't just sit here and eat. This is a kind of every generation of things. It's fundamentally affecting the global south. We can see from the cost of living economic impacts that are faced by the almost closure and stuff. And it has everything to do with intellectual life and archives. And where they are, I don't know if you guys are engaging, I'm sure you are, with the whole AI kind of thing. Because how do you do community education without that, outside of that? I mean, the beauty of culture and performance is one thing, but out of that is something else massively growing, in which our people are totally excluded. And what, we have to grapple. I'm really just putting questions here, and then saying, in our own country right now, we've got to make some big decisions. Do we believe in the democracy that was established, or are we going to go the way of popular right-wing daddies who look after us, dressed in uniforms and epaulets and stuff like that?
I just want to I'm most course international 700 years old. So as a youngster, more than 50 years ago, I was just walking around and speaking to people. Then the question was, then I came across everybody knew with the love. Yes, he was a Olympic cricketer. But when I spoke to him, they realized what the people actually said was much less than what they actually achieved. So I opened up the story. I want to know if there's any publications around individual cricketers that I can forward to them stuff that we can build up a base where he opened was the contract. He said they taking the same team with Vera. And according to my mother, he didn't go to England because he couldn't speak English properly. So when we need to go out there to write some papers for him, he said when he goes to the toilet, he must argue, then he memorize all the phrases of where to go. So yeah, unfortunately, it is some sort of.
No, thanks for that. I mean, I didn't want to talk about cricket because this is very unavoidable, amazing. I was privileged to meet him He also lent us his Springbok racing. It's the first black Springboks in rugby and cricket were chosen in the 1950s. And Lam Razet was a top player from Stellenbosch, Afrikaans speaking, and his family just revere him, and he is known by that generation. But volume 3, which we're doing now, it will go from 55 to 2025. September, and the guys won the world championships. And when Mao Zedong was asked, what are the impacts of the French Revolution? He said it's still too early to tell. That was 1789. We're going now write a history from 1960 to 2025. It's going to be very difficult to write. But I think what you're saying there is the respect for families, people, community. He was so much part of Stellenbosch, and they had the linkages with Newlands and Claremont before the Group Areas Act and all that. So Cavendish, for instance, the entrance to Cavendish Square today, I think is it Raya Street or one of those streets, is exactly on the road of Nazim Smith, who immigrated to the New Village. Can you imagine walking into Cavendish every time over the ferry? Things of your home is unbelievable. And half the population of Newlands and Claremont up to up until the group definitely by 1910 were black. And that's why you've got the mosque and the churches there. And you had the Gandhi School, the Blue Cross Hospital was Gandhi called the Gandhi School in that beautiful Newlands, which is now gentrified. Mr. Dudley was head of the school.
Livingston.
Sorry, my wife went to that school. And they had a market garden there in Newlands, and they had to leave it. A note came in your door in 1959, and you had to leave by 10 years. And now people take it as though it's normal. And that's what all violent systems do of conquest. They obliterate the physical manifestation of culture. Look at what's happened from Baghdad to wherever you look. 6,000 years of historical artifacts. It totally flattened together with the infrastructure on a new level that we've seen now. So how does the world who's left out of this big, mighty, 500-year-old kind of power block deal with what's coming?
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, we were thinking you mentioned early process with regard to what lessons included and what was the manual and so on.
No, I'm going to pose that question to Namaza, but when one talk about our started in the Western Cape at the time as a colony and all of that. So the space was basically created to hold that information as far back as 1651. But I think I want to also latch on to what Odendaal was talking, and when he was talking about this paper in terms of the indigenous knowledge and the indigenous intellectuals. For me, it was a sense of thinking about how do we look at restorative justice within the archive space by telling the story of the indigenous literature through the lens of the intellectuals. And I think that is what we currently are doing.
I'm sorry, I can't hear at all.
Oh,
Yeah, it's not your fault, I'm deaf.
okay. So
Is there a mic? Okay.
I'll raise my voice, Prof. Is that better? So I think it's about addressing the first harm of the colonial story, the erasure of that, looking at 1651 and beyond what happened before that. And it's about validating the indigenous knowledge system. And when one look at what Prof has mentioned in terms of the intellectuals and the first writing of Isifosa
through the missionaries, it actually tells you that in terms of indigenous knowledge, it started to be documented actually going back to the 1800s. So I don't want to say it dispels the notion that indigenous knowledge is only oral. It is partly oral, but it also sets the tone of how to. And for me, it's also about, it reminds me of our current generation and the generation in being and the archives and the role that the archives needs to play in telling the correct story or validating through oral history. And I know the archives are very big on oral history, but it's also for me, it's about how does within our department and other institutions, the role of museums, archives, and I think libraries as well, because libraries has got a link to community. How do they start to tell the story and how do we document it so that the erasure that has happened, it is there. You know, so it's about not erasing the past, because I know currently in the education space, there's also that issue of the erasure of the colonial past and what, but it's about, it needs to be there so that what comes to the fore in terms of addressing the erasure, so that one can see the two dichotomies of and correct that for 25, 30, 100 years to come.
Any other questions or comments? We'll take one last one before we move on. No? Okay, so in terms of just keeping that library spirit and putting people in the archive, our very own archives choir is made up of staff members and interns are going to do a couple of numbers for you now. Let's give them a please. And I should say they are led by composer and choir mistress, our deputy director, Constance Ngombo. So let's see. Come, choir.
Yangeni kwayala, yangeni kwaya, sinya kwaya, ya setike. Yangeni kwayala, yangeni kwaya, sinya kwaya, ya setike. Ngubani, miseregmen, Ngubani, Mr. Redman, Togo yetu ya setike. Ngubani, Mrs. Tinayo, Mrs. Waka, Bekeshi wetu wasedikes. Mrs. Waka, Bekeshi wetu wasedikes. Sheletikesi, 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 sheletikesi. Sheletikesi, 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 sheletikesi. Sheleakazi, 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 sheleakazi. Shelekovimba, 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 shelekovimba. Shelerolandi, 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 shelerolandi. Shelerolandi, 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 shelerolandi. Yangeli kwayana, yangeli kwaya, sinya kwaya, ya sedikes.
Archives rock. Go, buddy. One, two, one, two. Iyakali bigoko.
Cholanga nikalele Zanzibar.
Iyakali bigoko.
Cholanga nikalele Zanzibar.
Oh, kala bigoko. Wow! And these some of our interns have just arrived at the archive, so well done to them. So we are coming to the end of our program now. All that remains is for me to call upon our director, Nomasa Dingayo, for the vote of thanks. Now she's out of breath.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. We're more Alma, already known all our guests here in the archives, and also those that have joined us online. Thank you so much for joining us today. Yeah, I'm actually trying, you know what? You know that thing of excitement and liking music, but age doesn't go with it. Oh, and actually, and Carol, if I'm not here next week, you must understand that maybe my knee. I'm just recovering from knee operation, but now I'm dancing. I'm like, okay, I hope over the weekend it will be fine. Thank you so much to all that have joined us today. As it's been said in the opening by Carol, that this is the launch of the annual National Archives Awareness Week. It is an international Archives Week. We are working together with the International Council on Archives, and the theme was then, as Carol indicated, that it's global. So it's been decided throughout the world that the theme for Archives Week this year, 2026, will be Archives for Justice. There are various programs that are being run as we speak. In Northwest, for example, Northwest is hosting the national program, because what happens with the work that we do with the national archives and the provinces, we rotate hosting the national events on different programs, which includes this one. So currently in Northwest, I see my chaplain is here for the advisory committee. I thought she was going to be Northwest. They are now hosting the national launch, and the program for the week will also be in Northwest. So as I say, the whole country is busy in terms of the archival sector. First, I must thank our head of department for making time. I know you've got a very busy schedule, but you've made time to join us today. We really appreciate that. And our Chief Director, Carol, thank you for always being available to support us in these programs. We also appreciate, we know it's busy times. A word of thanks also to our Archives Advisory Committee members who have joined us. I know some of them they will join online, so we really appreciate the chairperson, Petra Courageous Spring, for always supporting us and coming, always being there to support us. And I must also say thank you to all our partners, because with the archives, you cannot do the work alone. We are doing with a lot of partners. Some of them have joined online, some of them are here from Catherine. So, and the Alma sector, we appreciate you being here, and we know the Department of Education, and we are very closely with, most of them are here, and our other governmental bodies that we work with. Some of the colleagues have joined online. We also appreciate you, Cecilia, part of our senior Cecilia Sani, one of the Director for Library Services, coming out as an EMT member today. I have not forgotten you. I can't. I really can't. Professor, thank you so much. I know we've had some engagements during the course of the year. We still continue. We really appreciate you coming out today and take us through a very interesting talk. And I was making notes, and I'm like, yeah, we've got also so many challenges that you're putting forward to us, which we really appreciate, because, and Carol as well, in your speech, the things that we need to do as the archives going forward, and also just to really look at how we've been doing things, and then going forward. There's a long way to go. And the whole issue, you mentioned, for example, one issue that has been also close to our hearts, the whole issue of curriculum. We were working with universities, working with schools, and we know, for example, now that the Department of Basic Education is also busy with the revision of the history curriculum, which definitely archives need to play a huge role in that. So, and they're working with universities. We've been talking a lot in the advisory committee meeting. I must say we are also lucky enough that in the committee itself, we've got representatives from the University of Cape Town, the University of University, the University of Technology, CPUT, Cape Peninsula University of Technology. So we also have those people that can also guide us in some of the processes, and they are guiding us, they are leading us. So we really appreciate that. We thank colleagues that, as I say, that we work with closely for some of the programs. I must say, okay, I'm only here for the vote of thanks for the archives, but I cannot mention some of the key programs that we just started. One of the new ones, which we launched on the 12th of March, is the traveling archives, which we worked with the colleagues from the museum services and library services. So, and we launched it in Morrisburg Museum. So those kind of programs. And I must say, we do push ourselves, to think beyond, and we welcome and accept the challenge that is put on us. But again, we cannot achieve all these challenges without the people that are around the room. Also, some people can assist us to direct us to the right people that can assist in some of the, you mentioned some of the engagement you had with the Stellenbosch professor around AI, so that those kind of networking and directing us to say, there's this person that is good at this. We welcome that because and even from our researchers, I'm sure some of them also have joined online. I know maybe some are sitting now in their reading room, but we want this archives to be a vibrant one. We've started. I think we've started with the engagements that we had. For example, the one I know we always talk about that is he wants more of those. The one that we had with the Justice Albisards here about the Roland Street. Because one thing, I think somebody mentioned it, to say we pride ourselves with the collections that we have in these archives. But the reality is, I must say, my child, when she asked something, Mommy, what about this? I said, I don't, you should know you work in the archives. I'm like, I don't know everything that is in this archives. So, as I say, one thing for sure, we don't know everything that's in these archives. So different people who have worked on different collections are the ones that can bring information up and then help us to go to a certain direction and have engagements and all. And one thing we also want to do, which we have also started but maybe did my best, is definitely to make the archives vibrant so that it's not only Helen is very good at that, and I must be honest. I've been honest, Helen, to say even the story about the Titanic. The story about Titanic, I didn't even know. I was working in the cast maybe for 5 to 6 years or so, and then I had it as part of the cruise in terms of the fact that there was a family from Worcester. So those kind of things, as I say, you can only hear. So I call upon now, as we are closing this Archives Week and knowing we are launching, and knowing that there's a lot of programs and that will be coming in the next week, and also calling on everybody to say, help us to be the best archives that we can be. And we, as I say, we call on you to assist us. We might be sitting with these records here, but you are the ones that have engaged and have worked and produced papers and produced presentations and produced a lot of things that can assist us. So, as I say, each and every researcher that comes through here, each and every inquiry, when we look at the numbers, what are these numbers telling us? So if we say we've got 5,169 or 94 visitors, what does that tell us? What themes have they looked at? Why are they more? All those questions, it's something that, we, as I say, we always think about and look at to say, okay, what are these themes? What are the things that we can take out and show the people? And so, as I say, that is mostly done through the clients and the partners and the collaborators and everybody that is in the archive. I do want to touch, before I close, my thanks, to thank in advance the presenters that are going to present in the program next week. I believe most of you might have seen the program. On Monday, we will have Mr. Mohammed here, Kara.
Right, sitting right there.
Thank you so much for getting yourself and sharing that information with us on Trace and Family History through Memory and Archives. So it's Monday 1 to 2. And then on the 12th, we've got Dr. Nick Simpson.
Not in the room.
doing climate change and heritage adaptation as intergenerational justice. So there was mention of climate change earlier on as well. I think the third one, let's go to my thing. I want to call people's names correctly. Mr. Laramid Zamstra. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we thank you again in advance for your talk that you'll have on Wednesday on Julia's Secret, Unpacking a Memory Box of Family History. And then on Thursday, you've mentioned Mr. Van Harris, who will be doing Madiba and Memory for Justice in the Age of AI. I think most of us are really looking forward to that. And also on Thursday, our very own Gustav, Dr. Gustav Hendrik will also be doing Family History for Beginners, a workshop that it's always in person. It will be in person, but it's now going to be in the Cape Medical Museum. So we're looking forward to that as well. I know there's always living in Tukami, there's always a request, sometimes more of these workshops that people are looking for community history. And then on Friday, we've got Ms. Kumo Magano doing Khangkhulu, reimagining the archives. So we thank these people in advance because we know preparing for these papers and engaging, it's going to help us in this program that we've put together for the Archives Week, going over to next week, and the groups that are going to come through the archives starting today and next week. And we know we've got colleagues that always help us from different departments to also spread the word about. So we appreciate that in terms of who will be coming. I must then thank the Archives Week committee that was preparing now for this week and getting these people to be able to do the program, to have this program. We really appreciate that, and our archives colleagues in general, and also the choir. Thank you so much. And there's a lot of work that gets done in the archives prior to the Archives Week, to prepare everything, the building to be nice and clean, and the colleagues that are also managing there, on the people online, so and signing in and everybody. So thanks to everybody, and some that did the procurement process prior to this day, and we really appreciate that. And as I said, all partners that will also be receiving us next week, and as it was indicated that we'll also be having pop-up events outside the archives, going out to communities, because we believe in taking the archives to the people. So again, as I say, you can also invite us. We can go out, and then we always. We are always available also when you want to come. You don't have, you must book. Not book as book, but just indicate so that there's somebody who are going to take you through. But everybody, both online and here, the archives is open for everybody from 8 to 4 during the week, 8 to 2, first and third Saturday of the month. There you don't have to book. You walk in, our colleagues then assist you. We also one of the institutions or places that still have a good thing in this Cape Town CBD, having the parking for researchers. So we are trying. We really try to care for our. On that note, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you once again for your very part and talk, and as I say, we still going to engage in them. Thank you.
And that is right on the stroke of the So thank you so much, Nomaza, and everybody for being here in the room and with us in the room online. So we will say goodbye to our friends online. Those in the room, there are some light refreshments outside for you to enjoy. And then if you would like to go on a behind-the-scenes tour of the archive, we will meet. You can meet me in the foyer once you've had a snack at about 12:20. And then we will do a bit of about 45-minute tour for whoever would like to join. So thank you so much for your participation.